friend. Welcome to Wild and Waking, a sacred space for the woman unraveling what no longer fits, remembering the truth that's always lived inside her, reclaiming her joy, her voice, her power, and rising fully, fiercely, and without apology. I'm your host, Emily Rushell, and together we'll explore what it means to live in alignment, lead with soul, and awaken a life of abundance, authenticity, and purpose. Let's begin. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Wild and Waking podcast. Today, I am so delighted to introduce you to Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton. But I just told her I cannot go one single week without one of you sending me a piece of her content, some of her reels. And so I know that many of you listening are already familiar with her and her work. And so I cannot wait to dive into this conversation. We are going to talk about all things healing from purity culture, reclaiming pleasure, Mary Magdalene. I mean, pleasure is power, all of the above.
It's so good. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that you said that. Like, it just felt so good that people are sending me these reels that we're making. I mean, I just feel like it shows that our worlds are so connected and we're just we're having the same thoughts and having the conversations that need to be had. And it does feel very on a soul level, soothing to know we're not alone, know?
Yeah. Well, and especially as a creator who's doing, and I know we'll get into this, but doing work that's different than maybe what a lot of people expect or what you thought your path was going to go down. Sometimes it feels like posting into the void and you're like,
right.
Is anybody out there?
Right.
Does this matter?
Exactly.
So, yes, it does. Okay. Well, if someone is just getting to know you for the first time, will you give us some context of who you are, where you are, and ultimately your journey that brought you into the work that you're doing today?
Totally. So I am Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton, and my company, Uncover, is pleasure and intimacy coaching for women. I really based it on my own journey of basically detoxing from shame and guilt and religious repression in particular and trauma, and just the role that pleasure had really played in me coming back home to myself. I didn't realize at the time, that was going to turn into kind of a blueprint that I would then be able to share with other women. And now it's 7 years later, it's a 7-figure business and we have clients all over the world. And it just feels kind of like it's an actual revolution of women feeling into their own power and awakening to their own pleasure and really releasing a lot of conditioning around shame and guilt and just all the things that, a lot of it does come from trauma and their religious past, but a lot of it also just comes from being in the world right now.
Yes.
So many clients who were I didn't even have anyone telling me to feel ashamed. I just absorbed it anyway.
Yeah. Could you dive into a little bit about what that looks like? When we talk about purity culture and the shame attached to it, I'm sure people are coming in with stories of what they assume that you mean. But my exploration of this, it's this touches every bit of who we are, regardless of your background in this world.
Such a good point. Really, it's almost easy to point the finger when my clients do have, a church upbringing where they were taught if they have sex, they're going to hell. And it's just this crystal clear pathway. But I have so many other clients too who are I don't know, everybody was super cool about sex. There's no reason, but I still feel nervous about sleeping with someone on the first date or getting called a slut. What if I'm dressed too provocatively? I'm worried that if I'm assaulted, did I do something that's signaling I was asking for it? Talking too much, being too selfish. It's all these ways that purity culture has its sneaky tentacles in us, even if we never bought into any of that kind of thinking. I don't like to think, but I often think it already bought its way into us,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't even have to have said yes to this for it to have already been in me and for it to be in our culture, especially if you're in the US. It's like kind of just in the fabric of our normal day to day, like what's considered a good woman and a good girl and a good wife. It's like, oh, God, there's a lot of conditioning here that I don't think we actually signed up for.
Well, and so much of it even seeps out of the idea of sex itself. It's like you said, like this definition of what it means to be a good girl and how to show up and how to speak and how to present yourself. Like it's in everything.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And that sense of like, I could like make one wrong move and be punished, Even I would say, this is like not the most popular of my takes, I don't think. But, coming from a more religious background, I feel like I've had a lot of experience with people like on the right. I would say there's like a purity culture thread on the left too, and that it's just a mirror image for me, for someone who's like been in both, to be like, oh, like you said the wrong thing, you did the wrong
Yes.
little bit wrong, you're out. And I'm like, gee, where have I heard this before?
Yes. No, I actually agree with this take wholeheartedly. I see, especially on like threads, right? The discourse that I'm like, you have just repackaged this like, hierarchical tier of holiness onto a different set of ideologies, but it's just as toxic and shameful.
And just as strict, and that fear that I know was one of the biggest pieces for me about purity culture, which was like, if I'm not good, I'm bad. Like there is no gray area. There is no middle ground. There is only this very strict black and white thinking. And, I feel like I'm seeing more and more of it, probably because we're in a time of such uncertainty and such chaos. I think there is that impulse to be like, maybe rules will help, maybe structure will help, maybe like someone telling me what's right is like the answer. Give me more structure.
It's like
But
grasping for certainty in a time that
yeah,
feels so uncertain.
totally. So it like makes complete sense. But then what I find is it like totally messes us up. And we're then afraid to do anything, afraid to make a move, afraid to use our voice, afraid to get it wrong because we're like being programmed that the stakes are so high, being good is so narrow. And if you're a woman getting all this conditioning, especially around sex, it's like not even really possible to follow all the rules. It's like be sexy, but don't have sex. Be like an object, but like not a subject of like your own desire. You should never do this, but also be great at it. Like it's just really confusing. And for people who have a Christian background, I often think about how, yeah, like the Virgin Mary being presented as like the perfect mother, but also never had sex. Very challenging ideal to live up to.
Well, and the rules change depending on what role you're expected to play.
Right, exactly. And so, one of the most liberating things for me that helped my inner people pleaser die was like, no, it's not even possible to please all these people.
Yeah.
If there were a consensus, I might have kept trying, but they don't even agree.
So, can we rewind and can you tell us a little bit more about what brought you into this path?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wild ride. So I was getting my PhD in women's studies basically when I learned about what coaching was. And I was also in my own process of like what is commonly called deconstruction with like religion. I had already been married, already been divorced. The divorce did not, I would say, go well. Like I was not that graceful about my exit. And we had been part of this evangelical church and had followed a lot of the rules. And then I mean, this is the first year of my PhD. So I was like maybe 23 at the same time that I'm trying to figure out, like what is going on in this marriage. And there was just, I now know, now that I've been studying intimacy and pleasure for a decade after that, there was just no chemistry at all.
Mm.
But I couldn't have told you that. I couldn't have even told you like what was wrong, really. I just knew we had waited, we'd followed the rules, and like something was not working. And I just assumed, which I think a lot of women do, a lot of women who've eventually like come to work with me do, that like something was wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what am I, how have I messed up? I remember talking with another friend who was also very religious at the time. We were both newlywed. And we were like, what is this lie that men like sex that we've been told? Like, it doesn't seem true. And we're like, I know, it's so weird. And it was just, oh, I look back and I'm just like my little self and like this little other friend. So anyway, I had like a big awakening and I left everything. I left my husband. I left my church. I ran off with someone else, which you're really not supposed to do if you're like a good Christian girl. I got kicked out of 2 Bible studies. And it was just crazy. Like it was tumult. And, it's so interesting because I would have still been like, I am the least likely person to become like an intimacy and pleasure coach, like in my next life, because I was still so shut down. I mean, I was learning and I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe following my desire is going to ruin my whole life, but life is
Yeah.
getting like pretty miserable. And so like, I think I'm just going to do it. And I mean, I wasn't really thinking that clearly anyway, but it's kind of like looking back, I can see. And I think this is a really triggering thing to say that I'm about to say, but even at the time, I was like, there is like nothing where I think guilt is supposed to be. Like,
Mm.
just felt free. And the difference between feeling desired and tapped into my desire and like I was listening to myself and following my pleasure. I mean, I look back and of course I'm like, yeah, there was like a better way I could have done all this, but I don't think I could have at the time. Anyway, so I'm like doing all this, finishing my PhD and getting like mean messages from like my Christian friends about the devil and starting to piece together like a methodology. I mean, without even meaning to, but about like what we really feel like underneath. And I really think if I had had Uncover before I'd gotten married, I wouldn't have. And I wouldn't, I mean, now I'm married again. I'm happily like on the other side of all this. But, I think back to that younger me who just didn't know what she wanted, didn't know who she was, didn't know what it would feel like to be with someone who like really loved her. And I am like, oh, this is all for you. Because if you could have taken my Uncover course, you wouldn't have even walked down that aisle. And you probably
Yeah.
would have forged your own path with your own religious community that was a lot nicer way earlier. So that, I mean, it's so interesting because the academic side did heavily weigh in. And I went on to do work at Yale. I have studied a lot of like religious stuff and texts. I think I was really just trying to answer my own
Mm-hmm.
questions. Probably could have just gone to therapy, but like got a PhD instead.
I feel like you could put that on a sticker or a t-shirt.
Right? I'm like, okay, you took the much longer, more expensive route. But it is so crazy because it sort of feels like it all was adding up, even though
Mm-hmm.
did not make any sense at the time. Now looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, of course you're the person teaching about Mary Magdalene. You were like the slut of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And now like can just see so clearly. And, some of those girls from that Bible study have signed up for things with Uncover. And you just think, yeah, of course, because no one taught you about pleasure either. Even
Right.
the ones who didn't want to leave their husbands, that's not a requirement for working with me. But it is like you still get to know yourself. Anyway, longest answer ever, but that's how
No, I first of all, I love that you even touch on this like invisible thread, invisible string, right? Because I think a lot of us retroactively look back and you're like, why? Like, how did I end up here? But when you look back and you connect all of the dots, you're like, of course I had to make that decision. Of course I had to do that thing. Of course I jumped into that, even though it didn't make sense, because in every bit of that, I had to gather the information and life experience to ultimately set myself up for the purpose that I'm living in real time. And I also love that you share like how much you didn't know going into, right, this very big life agreement. Because I think that's a really transferable for most women I know, right? Of just like how much we were not empowered in our pleasure, in our sovereignty, in our decision making, in our desires, right? And are kind of like pushed along this checklist of life of do these things and then you will be good and then you will be live happily ever after. Amen.
totally what could go wrong. And it's like
Right.
a couple things. Yeah.
Right. But it's like, well, in the absence of that, like who knows, what that journey would have looked like. And obviously there's so much purpose in it now.
I know. It's so interesting because this is a little bit, I don't know why I just feel the need to say every unpopular opinion that I have. This is like a little unusual amongst coaches, but I'm not really like a everything happens for a reason person. But I am a big nothing goes to waste person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, I think when you work with trauma, it's just like a little bit tricky to be like, I manifested everything. And it's like, I don't think you did. But I can totally say, like, no heartbreak, no pain, no hard part of that story hasn't made me a better coach and a better person to like guide women now, partly because they know like there is nothing they can say that will shock me. I was
Yeah.
the shocker. And I think there's this feeling of like, oh, I learned so much going through it all the hard way that like I can now help have that not be the only way.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, maybe there are some ways where this just gets to like turn into everyone else having an easier path. And that's really what I've found that Uncover, has been this mechanism by which women can have an easier time and like share stories. And it's like, okay, if this took me 10 years and like $100,000, maybe it can take you 6 months and maybe like 10 or
Right.
less. maybe,
Yeah.
maybe free.
So in your work, how do you define pleasure? How do you help women tap into that? I imagine that it is beyond just in sexuality, but
Totally.
above and beyond. So yeah, I
Yes.
would love to hear like what does pleasure mean to you and how do you help women
Yeah.
access it?
Yeah. Thank you for that because it really is so beyond. So it's actually, in a way, I feel like the impact that this kind of work has on sex is in some ways like a byproduct. Like everything gets better. So that's part of it. You're more present and you're more available for what you actually want and can communicate with more confidence. So, like, of course, those are all things that are going to make sex and intimacy like more fun. But it really feels like the main thing is about life in general, even just coming back into our senses and like what feels good to you and tastes good and like having beauty surround you and all these things that really are not that big a deal. But when you look under the hood, I know a lot of us feel kind of guilty about prioritizing them. Like, what do you actually need? And I know so many women who were taught, and I would say this is purity culture kind of like striking again, who were taught that like prioritizing their pleasure would be so selfish. I actually think, I mean, okay, so if somebody were here, like wanted to argue, they could say like, yeah, your story sounds like really fucking selfish. But what I would say is that that felt like evidence of the pressure cooker, like not working as a method. And that was me trying so hard to like stuff every desire down, ignore everything I wanted, be the good one who followed all the rules. And then it was like this
It exploded. Right.
of like chaos, you know, I was like, oops, I like blew up the whole house. When actually, I think that if I had been asking this question more and earlier and with more honesty, you know, it would have saved
It would have panned out so differently.
Yes. So I could see, you know, of course, I can see that interpretation or women who might be like, I'm worried if I start asking this question, I'm going to like blow up my life. And it's like, yeah, here I am to be like, sometimes that is true.
It's possible.
It's possible. But also will say, I don't know anyone who's been in that situation that didn't have a life that they actually deep down did kind of need to blow up. And it made room for something way better and something real. And then the majority of the time, it's like, oh, your partner or your kids or your friends and your family are just like, oh, we're so glad to have you back. You're finally you again. You in pleasure, you in like full bloom, you having a life that feels good to you is bringing back the girl that I like always loved. And she's been buried under like layer upon layer of brittle, bitter, like extracted from exhausted woman. And so we uncover her with pleasure.
So what are some tangible ways that the women listening can start, I was going to say accessing their pleasure, and maybe we need to start with like getting comfortable with the idea of being deserving of pleasure.
Yes. I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think the first thing is a mindset shift. And this is a little bit of a sneaky move because it's still sort of centering everybody else. But I do think the easiest way for most of us is to realize like, this does make me a better partner and a better mom and a better, you know, I'm better at everything. If I'm filled up, I have so much more to give. And I think it's just such a lie that we've been taught by purity culture that wants women to be exhausted. It's like a union busting technique. You know, that means energy to like rise up and demand that the patriarchy be overthrown. But it's like if we're in our pleasure, if we've had a great day, if we've like made time to go get a massage, if we like hired childcare not just to work, but to go journal at a coffee shop and get a haircut or whatever is going to make us feel like a human, we are showing up differently. And I think the biggest fallacy is that a depleted version of us who's given every last bit of herself away is a gift to anyone around us. For the most part, she's like kind of awful to be around. Yeah. So I think a mindset of everyone benefits when I'm prioritizing my pleasure. I mean, and it's a little bit like, okay, I could be like a pillow at TJ Maxx right now. Like if mama's happy, like everybody's happy. But I think that there's something profoundly true about that and what we model for our family and for our friends, that I have so much more to give when I'm filled up. And I notice that in business, you know, I don't know how many people listening are also entrepreneurs like we are, but it's like so crystal clear that better ideas, more creativity, more open to flow and receiving and abundance when I'm not working myself to the bone, feeling completely depleted and exhausted. I mean, when I say it this way, it sounds so obvious, but our conditioning is just so deep. Like, the good mom puts herself last. The good worker is like burning the midnight oil.
Self-sacrifice.
Yeah. And it's kind of been the opposite in my experience.
So from a very tangible standpoint, right? Because there's the pleasure in what we eat and what we surround ourselves with and how we spend our time and energetically how we're showing up. But inquiring minds also must know, they're in the name of purity culture. A lot of women I know still kind of grapple with the shame of pleasure in sexual context, right? Going from this like must be pure maiden to now you are married and should know and do everything. Like,
God, it's such a mindfuck.
I know, right? And a lot of women, I think, don't actually know what they want or like or how to articulate that. I do think that conversation is even slightly changing just with the growing popularity of like
Oh
romanticy.
my God, I was so glad you said that. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about next.
Okay, perfect. We could talk about this forever.
I can see fourth wing right now beyond my neck.
Yes, right. And I think that that has initiated a lot of conversations and a lot of people's, like, for lack of a better word, sexual awakening, transformed a lot of relationships and women stepping into their power. But it's still something that conditioning of discomfort runs really deep.
I completely agree. And I was going to bring it up if you didn't. Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things. First and foremost, I think listening to this, if you didn't turn it off already, like you're already a step ahead, like we're on the right track. And honestly, being in community, even online community, just like the only kind I had found at that time, with other women who could remind you, like, you're not the worst person in the world because you like want to go have like a weekend to yourself, or, it's not a bad thing if you like need something for you. It's actually a good thing. And here's why, and here's what to remember. Having other women who can really like remind you, that is a huge deal. And then, yeah, permission to explore, permission to play. I could not believe it when I realized that like virtually every client I had was reading the same book. I was like, I need to buy it. Obviously, what is this? And it was one of these romanticy books. I've now gone completely down the rabbit hole and I'm so in. But it's really true. I think you're absolutely right that permission to even ask, like, what turns me on? What do I want? For all of the like fluffy, kind of soft reminders that like pleasure is everything. What is beautiful? What makes you feel good? There's also the literal, like, what would make you feel like desired and what would awaken that in you? I think one of the things that those books can do that other things can do too, like if people feel called to check out, like explore what vibrators you might like, maybe like take a long bubble bath and explore touching yourself. So many clients I work with are like, I've never even tried. I had a client who'd had 4 kids and had never had an orgasm. And so it's like, okay, permission to play for sure. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is that the more we do that in any form, the more we reestablish that turn on is something that we have. I mean, I think part of the conditioning around sex is that it's so linked with a partner and what they do
Yes.
to us or what they
Mm-hmm.
do for us, maybe slightly better, what they want from us. And to be so honest, in a culture like ours, it feels so pleasurable to be wanted and approved of that often that I think gets confused with our desire, but it's not. That's different. So really thinking about like, this is something that lives in me. And it's actually something I can awaken and like turn on and tap down, like as I decide to. And if he or she is around and part of it, like lucky them, but this is like mine. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that is a huge shift. And it's one that if I had the mic and, could like implant something for everyone in 5 minutes, like that would be it. Because so many women, including me from the past, just it feels like our desire doesn't belong to us. But it
Yeah. Well, it's like another form of outsourcing our power.
yes, yes.
And I think the more we can tap into our pleasure in every sense of the term, the more we are getting in touch with ourselves, literally, the more we are getting in touch with our power, the more we are accessing that idea of like being the creation of life and accessing the divine within. And that unlocks a whole different level of consciousness, I think.
It's so true. And I feel like it's not the most important reason, but it is a nice bonus. It's more fun for our partners too. I feel like every good partner is like, you having more fun is going to have so much more fun for me. And so it just feels like it's one of those like mutually beneficial explorations. And like the more women know what they want and what is going to feel good to them, the more everyone benefits.
I would love, because I know that you could nerd out about this for a long time, I would love to hear everything or some of what you've uncovered related to Mary Magdalene and the stories that were, systemically removed from the narrative. And then also, how that links to the conversation that we're having today in real time in 2025.
Honestly, yeah, like you said, we could talk about this for 5 more hours, and I would love to.
This could be like a whole weekend workshop.
Totally. And I have a signature course on Mary Magdalene that really is like, it's like our whole podcast, but it's called Sacred and Shameless, and why Mary Magdalene is this figure for pleasure as the antidote to purity culture. I really think that something is happening in the world. Thank God. Thank Goddess. Because, it's so interesting that this figure, my background's obviously Christian, hence all the repression. There is this kind of like shadow around her where I did learn that she had been called a prostitute. I also learned that that wasn't true, but like, it was just, she wasn't ever really like restored to her actual like role in the story, like even in the best, most progressive like telling. And I have a ton of clients who were like, yeah, I just like heard she was a slut. I like
Yeah.
the update.
And that was like the end of it. The
Yeah.
end.
And then the reality is just so interesting. And then the mythology has taken on such an interesting set of twists and turns. So it's like, especially having gone to divinity school at Yale and like done my religious studies work where I like looked at this, and then having now kind of more esoteric training in the like feminine mystery school traditions, which there's some overlap and then there's like a lot of departure. And then there's just like straight up like history, which I actually mostly am bored by, but in this case, I'm interested in. And then there's certain things about her where all three overlap. And that has been really fascinating to dive into too, because, the main one that everyone agrees on is that she had money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never fucking heard about that.
Yeah.
Like, that was totally left out of the story. But it's right there in the Bible. Mary Magdalene paid for, it's in the book of Luke, if anybody's interested, paid for Jesus and the disciples to travel and to eat. And historians think, she came from this pretty wealthy fishing village, Magdala. They think she may have even been an entrepreneur. And so it's like, oh my God, we have an archetype actually of a wealthy woman whose devotion to this mission, which I think we could argue is like a pretty radical one. She does get like taken out by the state. So it's like, okay, this is like an intense adoration of like this kind of band of rebels. She's funding it. And when I like really learned more about that, I did have a moment of like, of course they called her a whore.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to handle a wealthy woman who's also a spiritual leader who was
because she was a priestess, right?
Yeah. That's like the mystical tradition that she was trained in the temples of Isis, and that had a pleasure component. And so she doesn't get called a prostitute until 600. Like, it's way later, but it's the Catholic Church as the Roman Empire is like organizing itself. And they cut the Gospel of Mary from the official canon. And the Gospel of Mary is one of the ones that says, you're divine, you're a direct channel to God, you have power yourself, you don't need a hierarchy. So you can see why if you're like the empire trying to really shore up, you do need hierarchy, you do need power.
Mm-hmm.
It's like very inconvenient. So she gets cut, she gets called a whore, her whole history gets erased. It's certainly not shared that she was like a wealthy priestess. And yet, I can't help but think like, but here we are talking about her 2,000 years later. It's like, you can try. You can bury this gospel and you can cut her from the canon, but you cannot erase the truth.
Mm. I think for me, I've referenced the book Mary Magdalene Revealed so many times on this podcast, but just even getting like the really concrete history of how much the Bible that we know today has been manipulated and curated and segmented and retranslated has been like, okay, so
Certain
what?
words being translated as this for certain
Mm-hmm.
reasons. But if you look at the Greek or the Hebrew, you would be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's like, okay, well, if this is only a piece of the truth, then what else could be true?
right, right. I think what's so beautiful. So I have this priestess training program that is like a Mary Magdalene mystery school. And it brought in, I would say, like half people who had a really similar background to me, kind of a Christian background, maybe like had strayed away from a more strict interpretation, but still wanted like something. But it also brought in a bunch of people who are like, some Muslim women, some pagan women, people who are like, I have no interest like whatsoever. If anything, I'm like anti, but I'm drawn to this anyway. And the more we've looked at the Gnostic Gospels, and especially the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the more they're like, oh, well, the actual early Christianity, the actual connection between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, I'm into this. And it's like they're seeing, I mean, this was like not my plan or anything, but it's just been so interesting that even my like pagan tantrika clients are like, well, this actually makes me more interested in Jesus.
Right. Like I can get down with that.
Because this part, it sounds like he's just trying to like heal and feed everyone, and he loves women and is like heralding them as positions of power and leadership. And like, yeah, what could be better?
Yeah. I think that invites a really interesting conversation that might be relevant to someone listening, right? And how do we integrate this new information or ideologies or even the concept of pleasure, right? Without throwing everything we've ever known out the window, right? Like we're in kind of these messy single seasons of untangling, but like so much of who we are and how we move through the world is rooted in these things that we're like, well, it's not all bad, but like, how do I make space for pleasure and also X, Y, and Z?
Gosh, I love that question. And I feel like I have a shortcut, and I wonder how you'll feel about it and if like people listening will resonate. But it has been really profound and powerful for me to come into a truth of like, God gave me these desires, and like God gave me this kind of like vessel for experiencing pleasure. And so every integrated like moment has felt kind of like, oh, this actually feels like it's bringing me closer to the divine. And I was taught, this would bring you away. This is like dangerous. Don't listen to your heart. Don't listen to what you want. I feel like recognizing that came from men, that came
Yep.
from humans, and then that came from a scared place of like, what would happen if women really knew how powerful they were. But that idea, instead of like, oh, what if your desire isn't a pathway straight to the devil, but actually a communication with God, a communication with the divine. And if you're in alignment with it, it's because you're meant to have it. I mean, I have yet to work with women. Like, nobody is like, oh, it turns out my like deepest desire is to like murder a bunch of people. I don't know. I feel like that's like kind of what we're afraid of, that like there is something like monstrous in there. I find when I work with women over and over is it's like them having their desires met means everybody is going to flourish and they're going to take care of their kids. They're going to support their family. Often they have these desires for like massive community uplift. It is just so far not the case that something bad happens when women like get to have what they want in my world. And so I think there's a way to integrate it by rewriting the narrative around what's selfish and what's dangerous. And instead to really see like God is communicating with us through these things and we have them for a reason, and teaching women to mistrust their own desires was like a design of the world, but
Yes.
something that feels like it's what the creator of the entire universe wanted for us.
Yeah. In my experience, the more connected women are to their pleasure, to their purpose, to their power, like the more good that they're able to do, the more money circulates, the
Yes.
more light radiates. And I think it's a complete lie that we've been sold that in order to be good, we should be small and sheltered and weak, for lack of a better word. I think women in their power changes the world. And I'm certain that's why it was branded as bad.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think that's exactly it, and it feels like more and more, this is what I'm seeing everyone wake up to and think like, oh, there could be a different interpretation of all of this. Even purity culture and like, okay, I could kind of see, maybe there was like a kernel of something true about how sacred the body is and how sacred sex can be. But then it kind of lost the plot when it came out as like, you're a
Lost the
chewed
plot.
up wad of gum if you have sex. It's like, oh God. But, that there are these ways that we're almost like returning to a truer thing.
I think another important piece of the puzzle is that purity culture very much equally affects men.
Yes, totally. All the pressure and all of the strictness. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think the broader conversation about patriarchy just being like hard on everyone is so helpful and so needed.
So as women, mostly women listen to this podcast, that and my husband, hi, Andrew, I think there can be some kind of awkwardness or trepidation as we start reclaiming, stepping into our pleasure, our power, and whatever, in like kind of that way that it may or it does affect our relationship. What advice do you have for listeners, or perhaps that you give your clients as they're navigating their own journeys in bringing these conversations into their relationships and really being a guide for, untangling and dismantling these pieces of purity culture that hold us all so captive?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I would say, like, you might be surprised, especially if you have a partner who's also been kind of like in this world or has watched you navigating it. I feel like I've been surprised by the times I'm like, okay, I think I need this. I think I want this. Like, can we talk about this? My husband is just like, oh my gosh, of course. I actually like have been waiting for you to say this or waiting for you to ask. It's just, it's so much more often than I would think. And then my clients would think, and their husbands, especially, who I feel like we're more worried about than female partners, their husbands are like so on board. Like, oh, is this going to make you happier? Is this going to mean maybe we have sex more? Like, is this going to mean like, like we have more fun? Like, yes, go get a massage every Saturday. Or like, it can be less practical than that if needed, but permission to ask for that. And permission to think too that even if that's not the reception, that conditioning is so deep in us all. It's not about you. It really is about this broader paradigm. And even if the medicine is like a little bit are going down, you going first and putting your pleasure first is actually a permission slip for them too. And you can name that.
I love that. Okay, I feel like we could actually talk for hours, and
Literally,
this
like,
has been
stay tuned for a
amazing.
week-long podcast coming up where we just talk nonstop for days.
I would
But
be
we
so
got a
down
good
for that.
start. This was a good start.
Because there's just so many pieces of this, and it's not just one topic. It's an umbrella for 300 topics, which I think you weave together so beautifully in a way that meets people where they're at, wherever they are at, which feels like a really good segue for you to tell us more about if this conversation has sparked something. What are some next steps that we can take alongside of you? Because I know that Uncover has so much to offer.
Thank you. It's so generous to open up that conversation. But, the main thing I would say is I did put together a little free course called Harlots and Heretics
So
that
good.
is Mary Magdalene focused. So especially if that part, I feel like my people, there's like a nerdy thread for us. So it's like, okay, if that's you, you've like found a good couple of people to be at home with. But yeah, that is available.
I listened to that course when our dryer went out and I was at the laundromat
Oh
one
my
day
God,
doing laundry.
amazing. I love that. I love that. Yeah, I can go with you anywhere, help you through anything. And then speaking of going anywhere, I do these retreats to Paris, and that can be a really great pleasure immersion. If you're like, where do I start? Just let me take care of everything. I'll feed you. I'll take you to the spa.
Do you guys go and visit the Mary Magdalene sites in France while you're there?
Yeah. So that is a longer retreat, but in the priestess school, which there are some spots open. If anybody listening is like, oh, that's for me. That's like deep dive all the way. But yeah, there's a bit in Paris and then a longer piece down in her cave. It's crazy.
I've heard Katie talk about her experience going,
Yeah.
and every person that I've heard share about their experience with
Yeah.
that, I'm just like, I can't wait. Someday.
Yeah. Someday. It's a big deal.
Maybe when I'm not actively having babies.
Fair. Fair.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And on social media, you are Dr. Kimberly
Dr.
Rose
Kimberly
Pendleton.
Rose Pendleton. Yes.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, last question that I ask every guest who comes on the show is, what does growth look like for you in this season?
Honestly, being here is part of my answer. So I really feel like I sneakily created my little 7-figure a year business with 80 clients who all mostly agreed with me already about everything and really never had to be that brave. And this year I've really consciously been let me say yes to speaking and talking to people and letting my kind of videos get more popular and go viral. And it is going to mean probably not everybody is going to think this is great, but it's worth it. It's worth it every time I get a message from somebody who's like, oh, I was taught I was dirty my whole life and now I feel better. I'm worth it. Absolutely worth any weird comments on TikTok.
If you don't mind, what has the reception been? Because I know this is something that holds a lot of people back from sharing about literally anything, right? It's oh my gosh, what are people going to think? Can I handle the backlash? This is really out there. And whether it's online or in conversations with our partner, with our friends, with our community, with our in-laws, when you start having conversations that directly go against the norm that we've all just accepted, it's very terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what has that been like?
It's been interesting. It's been easier than I thought it would be because I was such a good girl, but I realized I've been in this boot camp in my own life of like letting that part of my identity go. So there are times it's kind of fun. Like if I get the right comment from someone being like, this is why women should stay quiet. I'm like, okay, like I must be like on the right track. But I do think it's where community has been even more helpful. Like I'm in a bunch of masterminds. I have a lot of support and a lot of coaches because it is nice to be able to be like, okay, people are mad. I'm not going to die, right? Because in the past, I would have been burned at the stake. And so just checking back in with my like sisterhood. But it's good. It's good. I feel like I'm handling it better than I would have thought. And I do have a lot of like support helping me.
Well, and a lot of comments like that is confirmation that the work you're doing is needed more than ever. But I know that's so much easier said than done.
It is. It is. But then I feel like we've got that fire burning for a reason. So there is another piece, which is, we think, oh, well, that sounds scary. I just won't do it. But if you have a soul mission, it like bursts its way out. Either way, it's going to be uncomfortable. So you might as well be in the discomfort of like doing your soul assignment.
It's like a choose your heart, like keeping it in and showing up as a fraction of what you're meant to be doing is also like one of the most painful things I've ever experienced.
100% agree with that. Yeah. And get in rooms, have things like this in your ear, like remind yourself you're not alone because that is helpful.
It's one of the most like me too is one of the most healing phrases ever, right?
It's so true. It like immediately calms my nervous system down. I'm like,
Yeah. With every group program, every retreat I've ever hosted, it's like within the first hour, there's like this collective exhale of like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. Because if you don't see it represented in your day-to-day reality, like you do start to spiral out being like, am I crazy? And it's like, well, maybe, but there's other people who are right there with you. And that's where I feel like conversations like this are so important because they like recalibrate our sense of possibility and our openness to new ideas and to kind of like reset that bar of like expectation and normalcy and like, okay, I listened to this podcast about pleasure and sex and I didn't die. Like maybe I could read a book. Maybe I could take a course. Maybe I could listen to another podcast. Maybe I could initiate a conversation. Maybe I could try something. Oh, that actually kind of felt good. And I didn't die and no one came after me and told me I was a bad person, right?
Exactly.
Like I really feel like we are in an incredible collective awakening, especially as women. And it makes me excited to see where it all goes. Because even just the conversations we're having now compared to 5 years ago is totally different.
Agreed. Totally agreed. This has been so good. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, well, I would do it again for 5 hours and longer. It was so good.
Okay, part 2 coming someday.
Exactly. But it just shows like there's so much alignment and we're not alone in any of this.
Yes. And for anyone listening, if there's something that we said that sparked something in you, you have further questions about stories you want to share, I know either one of us, our DMs are open and we love hearing the confirmation that someone is listening and doing something with the information.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you
much. Hey friend, I hope this conversation sparked something real in you, something that feels like truth, curiosity, or the courage to keep becoming. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to share it. Take a screenshot, post it to your stories, or send it to one of your friends. You can always find me over on Instagram at Emily Rushel, where I love continuing these conversations and hearing your takeaways. Truly, your DMs are one of my favorite parts of podcasting, so don't be shy. I'd love to reflect and connect with you over there. I'm so grateful to be surrounded by a community of women who ask hard questions, sit in the discomfort of the unknown, blaze new paths forward, and ultimately come home to their wild and waking selves. See you next week.